In the beginning, there were the Bavarians. And the Bavarians saw fit to bless the world with the BMW M division. And the M division was king. Years passed, and the kingdom grew, and with this expansion came new challengers who would try and take the mantle from the M-striped king. Yet the king prevailed. In fact, he seemed to welcome and even savor the challenges brought forth. Since then, the king has been reincarnated through various generations. But we will always look back at the genesis of greatness. Now, almost 35 years after Genesis, we are in the F80 generation's end times. And today, I'm driving Revelations. This is the F80 M3's swan song, and it is the apex predator of its generation. A paragon of Bavarian performance, it represents the best of the best that BMW M had to offer, and it's playing its final encore. Join me for this long-term owner review as we dive deep and explore the limited edition BMW F80 M3 CS. Now, many argue that the M3 CS exemplifies what an automaker should do when it comes to sunsetting a top-tier vehicle from their performance crown. With a limited production run of only 1,263 examples in the world, this swan song will see the end of the F80's reign with the new G80 generation taking front stage. But before we dive any deeper, let's briefly talk about all the F80 M3 versions first. We start out with the base M3. I won't go deep into the details because you can watch my previous M3 long-term review for that, but as you know, the base is already considered a veritable Swiss Army knife. Putting out 425 horsepower and 406 torques, it's a world-class athlete that's already proven itself time and time again. Owners had the option of both a manual or DCT transmission, and you can distinguish the base M3 from the other variants by the chrome rear model badge and chrome exhaust tips, since they differ from the other models. Next up is the M3 Competition. Take what the base M3 had to offer and dial it up a few notches thanks to a slew of upgrades, such as a sportier sounding exhaust with new shadow tips, retuned dampers, springs, and anti-roll bars which lower the car by 10 millimeters. Then we have the updated seats with back cutouts, interior M-striped seatbelts, 666 M wheels, and black chrome rear model badge. Last but not least, there's of course a bump in power, from 425 to 444 horsepower. And then we have the M3 CS. The M division gave it 453 horses, 443 torques, and quite a few other upgrades which we'll dive into in greater detail later. For now, let's step outside and see what the CS can do in its natural habitat, the racetrack. Welcome to the Ridge Motorsports Park. Today, we'll be putting the M3 CS through its paces on this 16-turn, 2.47-mile track. With 300 feet of elevation gain and loss per lap, including a 50-foot plunge, this track will be the perfect testing ground for the M3 CS to prove its mettle. The fine folks at the Ridge Motorsports Park have given us full access to this closed course. I believe the only appropriate response to this generous gift would be to make the most of this time and see just what our busy Bavarians have actually been up to. So, let's put this super sedan to the test. First things first, there's nothing quite like the sound of an unleashed M on a racetrack. And speaking of sound, I have the M Performance Titanium exhaust equipped. It's one of 3 rare options you can add to the CS, and it'll set you back $4,935, and aside from weighing 13 pounds or 6 kilos less than the steel version, it takes the sound of the S55 twin turbocharged 3-liter straight 6 engine and turns it into, well, listen for yourself. I mentioned options, and the other remaining 2 you can tack onto the CS are the carbon ceramic brakes, which I'll talk about in a bit, and the executive package, which includes the sunshades, PDC, adaptive LED headlights, auto high beams, and the heads-up display. For North America, all CS cars were ordered with the executive pack, and it adds $2,600 to the retail price. Top speed is limited to 174 miles per hour, and 0 to 60 is officially listed by BMW M as being 3.9 seconds. I asked the M engineer if the engine boost was adjusted on the CS, and he's confirmed that it has, but not by any meaningful margin compared to the base and competition models. Turbo lag is essentially non-existent, but that was the case with the base and competition models as well. The M3 CS comes standard with BMW's M Active suspension with Comfort, Sport, and Sport Plus modes. Each mode adjusts the car's damper settings. You can also adjust the weight of the electrically assisted power steering. There's also an M differential on board which has been adjusted, and the limited slip unit pairs with the stability control system and smartly distributes the torque. You can also enter M dynamic mode, and the system gives you a bit more play for some tail-happy shenanigans. All in all, the suspension adjustments that the M division have made to the CS allow for better torque delivery, avoiding the jumpy nature that sometimes was noticed on the other variants. It's more manageable when you're pushing towards the limit, and as a result, you have more time to react, which makes it feel more stable. This, in turn, gives you confidence. The front end is very responsive, and turn-in is razor sharp without being too harsh. And I can still feel what the front end is doing through my steering input. For tires, you have 2 choices. The Michelin Cup 2s are your high-performance option, which perform incredibly well on track in good conditions. However, should it rain or get colder where you live, you're in trouble. So BMW also offered the M3 CS with Michelin Pilot Super Sports, which is what I have equipped here because I live in Washington State and the weather here isn't always ideal. Let's talk about the transmission. I have to say, I ordered my previous base M3 with a manual transmission, and there's nothing quite like the feel of shifting your own gears. There's no denying that, at least for me. But on the track, in full attack mode, you absolutely cannot beat the immediacy of the dual clutch transmission. It's ridiculously fast, and every now and then I like to pretend I'm a Formula 1 driver with the paddles. Seating position is exceptional, especially for someone that's race car driver sized. Meaning I'm 5'7", so I'm pretty small. The seats are very good and provide lateral support that you need when spirited driving is called for, like on a racetrack. This is also where the extra thick Alcantara CS steering wheel makes you feel like a hero, but can also act as a sort of grab handle for those times when you overcook it. Going fast is fun, but what happens when you need to slow down? Let's talk about the brakes. From the factory, you get the standard M3 setup, which consists of a steel 4-piston fronts and 2-piston rears. Thankfully, BMW M also offered a carbon ceramic option, which I mentioned earlier, and which this M3 CS is equipped with. They'll set you back $8,150. For that money, you get satin gold paint, a lot less brake dust, and the periodic squeak, which is a ton of fun. Joking aside though, these brakes are phenomenal. They give you a strong pedal feel which inspires you with confidence, and brake fade is greatly minimized. And that's really what you're paying for, consistent performance at high temperatures on a track environment. When they're dry, they work really well. When they're hot, they work extremely well. When they're wet? Well, I'll talk about that later. So, how does the M3 CS handle the track? Well, frankly, it's an M3, and that in itself means something. It will always perform well on a track. All M3s do, even more so the CS, which is a step above the competition variant, and of course the base model. The super quick DCT transmission coupled with the almost instant torque delivery means you're never more than a few milliseconds away from your ideal gear. The carbon ceramic brakes do not disappoint on the track, and they perform extremely well in reining in the speed. As for the tires, the Michelin Super Sports handle themselves very well. Of course, the Cup 2s would have done better, but again, we'd sacrifice grip in less than ideal weather. This whole package works extremely well, and acting like the dessert at the end of a proper feast, the M Performance exhaust is the cherry on top. The truth is, BMW M spends millions of dollars in research and development across the globe on world-renowned tracks like the Nürburgring, and it shows. The M3 CS is sharper, more immediate, and very eager to show you that it's the top Bavarian dog when compared to its F80 generational brothers. Without exaggeration, the M3 CS feels right at home on any track, and can comfortably call it its natural habitat. Now that we know a bit more about its lineage, and how it handles the track, I think it's time we take a closer look. I always thought BMW's marketing team could have done more in providing us with specifics, but fell a little short of that goal. The truth is, the M Division DNA runs a lot deeper than the naked eye can see, and all these hidden gems combined make the CS something truly special. Starting with the wheels. The CS comes equipped with the 763M forged light alloy wheels. The Orbit Gray finish is specific to this car, and the DTM racing design is very evident, especially when you consider the fact that you're rocking 19s on the front and 20s on the rear. This, I'm told by our M engineer, was a purposeful decision in order to increase the driving dynamics over the base and competition variants. The tires, as I mentioned earlier, are the Michelin Pilot Super Sports, 255/35 ZR19s on the front and 285/30 ZR20s on the rear. Note that if you have the Cup 2 tires, they differ for the fronts with an increase of 10mm. Now, let's go into the CS and talk about what you can't see: the recalibrated M differential and electronic stability program. These differ from the base and competition models, and because of the new parameters, the DCT transmission settings also had to be adjusted. And because we're on the subject of transmissions, what I didn't mention while we were on the track is the fact that the M3 CS can only be had with a dual clutch transmission. A manual was never offered, unlike the F87 M2 CS, which offers you both options. Also, here's an interesting fact that I know a lot of F80 owners are curious to know. The M3 CS retains its carbon fiber drive shaft. For those of you wondering why I'm making the statement, it's because BMW M phased out the carbon fiber ones and replaced them with steel versions in later model years. I don't know about you, but I'll take carbon fiber over steel any day of the week, even if I can't see it. Next up, the aerodynamic components. Both the front carbon fiber splitter and split rear wing were designed and tested in BMW's wind tunnel specifically with and for the CS in mind. Aside from the aero benefits, you can also use these cues to help differentiate it from the base and competition models. Same goes for the rear carbon fiber diffuser with its Venturi fins that channel the air and clean it up a bit before it exits the rear. Keeping the carbon theme going, let's talk about the hood, or the bonnet if you're from across the pond. To save more weight and in order to lower the center of gravity, the M3 CS borrows some parts from the hardcore M4 GTS. One of those parts is this gorgeous carbon fiber hood, which is approximately 8 pounds lighter than its non-carbon fiber variant. One additional cool feature that I really love is the fact that BMW M left the underside uncovered so we can enjoy the massive carbon weave. We also have this large sculpted functional vent that keeps the engine bay cool by allowing the heat to escape and be redirected out and above the car. Next, we take a look at the roof of the M3 CS, which has another weight-saving design choice which also improves the center of gravity, and also looks really cool in my opinion. And that is the carbon fiber roof panel. On the base M3 and M3 competition variants, you have the choice of equipping them with a sunroof or without. If you elect to have a sunroof, you lose the carbon fiber roof. On the M3 CS, you don't get that option. It only comes with a carbon fiber roof because race car. Now, onto the interior. For the US market, all M3 CS cars came equipped with the full leather treatment in this bicolor black and silverstone finish, which extends to the dash and doors. The contrast really pops and looks crisp in my opinion. As for the trim, the only choice you have is Alcantara, and that treatment extends to the center console as well as the steering wheel and dash. Special CS etching reminds you that you're in something special, and to drive that point home, if you decide to lean on your armrest to take in the glory that is all this Alcantara, don't, because you don't get an armrest, because BMW M thinks that you shouldn't be resting while driving the M3 CS. You need to be on your toes. I'm kidding, of course. This is yet another weight-saving measure that BMW M administered. However, there is a domino effect thanks to the lack of the center console. And that, explicitly, is the exclusion of comfort access. If you're not privy to comfort access, it's the feature that allows you to lock and unlock the car by simply having the car keys on your person. In talking to our M engineer, it sounds like the removal of the center armrest also removed the onboard system that's responsible for managing comfort access. Slightly annoying, but not the worst thing ever. You do get this little secret cubby right underneath the light switch that almost everyone seems to miss somehow. It's big enough to store keys, gloves, masks, even a wallet or a small clutch. Now onto the HVAC, or heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. You'll notice that the heating, ventilation, cooling controls differ from other M3s. Instead of a dual climate zone, you get one general zone. And in place of an LCD screen, you get traditional analog controls. Lastly, the air conditioning unit in the M3 CS is smaller than that found in the base or competition variants because more weight savings. But with that said, the smaller capacity AC unit does a great job at keeping you cool when it gets toasty outside, so no worries there. I should also mention that, like the competition M3, you get the special cutout seats. But unlike any other variant, the M3 CS comes with these awesomely accented M stripes, which are specific to the CS model and are reminiscent to the M stripes found on the E36 Vader seats. You also have the M stripe stitching on the seatbelts, just like on the competition variant, and of course, M stripes on the very fat, very satisfying CS-specific Alcantara-wrapped steering wheel. One last bit of info, which a lot of CS owners will appreciate me mentioning, is the fact that compared to the base and competition M3, the CS has a larger oil pan and one additional oil pump to ensure that the engine stays well lubricated when it's being put through its paces. This means that the CS requires 0.5 quarts of extra oil for a total of 7 quarts, or 6.62 liters. Be sure to keep that in mind for your next oil change. All of these updates are specific to the M3 CS, and most of them are done in the name of saving weight and adding performance. How much weight does all of this net us? Well, our M engineer says it's good for over 110 pounds or just around 50 kilos. That's the equivalent to a small human, or a massive sack of potatoes that you're not carrying with you. And final, the total weight of the M3 CS is 3,495 pounds or 1,585 kilos. That's slightly over 1.5 tons. And with that, we've covered the general figures, track performance, and the explicit differences between the base, competition, and CS model. Now it's time to get more in depth, where I share with you my learnings, my thoughts, my complaints, points of interest, basically anything that I've learned from the car by owning it for the past 24 months. For those of you that have been following me for a while, you know that this is my own personal M3 CS, and that's part of the reason why I'm actually able to do a long-term owner review. Previously, I used to have a 2017 F80 M3 with the M Performance pack on it. That was covered in a long-term owner review that I already did. It's a two-parter. You can go watch that after you watch this video. I highly recommend it. But ultimately, I had to let the first M Chief go because honestly, I fell really hard for the M3 CS. I really couldn't pass up on the opportunity to own this proper M beast. I knew it was going to be the last of the F80 generation M3s before the G80 arrived, and so here we are. Let's start with the brakes. Now, remember, these aren't your standard steel versions that come on the CS. These are your optional carbon ceramics, or CCBs for short. They are by far the most expensive option that you can add to the car, and they're a bit of a specialty item, so I wanted to go more in depth and talk to you about them. These brakes should be viewed and treated as high-performance parts that are designed for the rigors and high temperatures generated on a racetrack. As such, they behave differently, and so you need to recalibrate and adjust your brain and how you brake, generally speaking. And the reason for that is specifically because their performance is predicated on their temperature. If they're warm, they work really well. If they're hot, they work very well. And if they're cold or wet, then I'm not kidding, you really need to be careful. To mitigate any hair-raising scenarios, if they're cold or wet, you should apply light pressure to dry the rotors and get some heat into them so that when the pads bite, they bite properly. Aside from the awesome and immediate bite that you get from the carbon ceramic brakes, our M Division contact let us know that you actually save 40 pounds over the steel versions with the carbon ceramics. Now, shaving 40 pounds of unsprung mass goes a long way, especially considering that the suspension handles and reacts differently to driver input as a result. Another bonus of having the carbon ceramic brakes is that, as everybody knows if you're into BMWs are a little bit famous, maybe infamous, for brake dust. A great bonus of going with the carbon ceramic brakes is the fact that they don't produce or generate a ton of brake dust, so your wheels stay cleaner for longer. Now, as far as how many miles you can get out of a set of carbon ceramic brakes, it varies, of course, depending on your driving style, but pads would need to be replaced every 50,000 miles and the rotors themselves every 100,000 miles. This again obviously depends on your driving style and whether you track your CS or not. Now, remember a little while ago when I said that you should view these brakes as a specialty item? Well, race car gear behaves differently than your standard gear. These brakes squeak. They're not broken. It doesn't mean that they're faulty, but that's just the nature of the beast. They squeak when you brake sometimes. Sometimes they squeak when you turn, and other times they squeak when you just take off at a leisurely 12 miles an hour from a stoplight. This is race car technology, my friend. It's perfectly normal, and honestly, after a while you get used to it, and it sort of becomes your song of honor for those that are initiated and they know what carbon ceramics are all about. Lastly, as I mentioned earlier in the review, tacking on the carbon ceramic brake option onto the CS will add an additional $8,150 US. And when it comes time to replace them, you're looking between $8,000 and $10,000. Now, again, you get better braking, much better fade resistance, especially in track conditions, and they look really cool. They're bigger, they have that satin gold finish. The rotors are massive front and rear. You get 6 piston calipers on the front, 2 on the rear. They look pretty special. Ultimately, you have to ask yourself what kind of driver you are and if you will actually benefit or use these brakes to their fullest potential. That's a question that only you can answer. Next, creaky door jambs. And this happens because of the way the rubber seal interacts with the door frame and when you add torsional flex to the body frame of the car. Mostly you hear that when you go over a speed bump or when you enter or exit a steep driveway. For me, it's not a big deal. I actually don't hear it anymore, but I know a lot of people hate any cabin noise. You can fix it by putting some lubricant between the door seal and the door frame. That seems to fix it, at least for a while. Not a big deal personally, but definitely wanted to call it out. On to the center console. As I mentioned earlier, you don't get one in the M3 CS. And a lot of people ask me if I miss having a center console for me to rest on or to put stuff in. And personally, my short answer is no. I keep my documents in the glove box, I keep my phone by the cup holder, and I keep my driving gloves in the door panel to the left of me. Also, a lot of people, as I mentioned, forget that there's a little secret cubby underneath the light switch to the left, and that right there holds absolutely everything I could possibly need when I'm driving. I wanted to touch up a bit on the colors that BMW M offered on the M3 CS. Mine is San Marino Blue Metallic, and it comes from BMW Individual's color lineup. For the uninitiated, that means that you can't get this color on a standard BMW unless it's specifically designated by BMW M. The M3 CS can also be had in Sapphire Black, Alpine White, Lime Rock Gray, and Dark Blue 2, which is a matte/frozen finish. I personally fell in love with San Marino Blue. It is, in my opinion, by far the nicest color/paint I've ever had on any of my cars, and I think blues are ruined for me. Previous to San Marino Blue, my favorite blue was Le Mans Blue from the E39 M5. San Marino Blue is really hard to beat. To this day, 2 years later, it still pops, it still catches me in awe. In different lighting conditions, it can be purple, it could be royal blue, navy blue. It's quite special, and it's got a ton of metallic flake in it as well that really pops when the light hits it. Reminder on the oil. Remember, M3 CSs and M4 CSs for that matter take 0.5 quarts of oil in addition to the 6.5 that the standard and the competition cars take. So remember, remind your shop technician or whoever it is that you go to get your oil changed that the CS cars take 7 quarts of oil because of the additional oil pump and larger oil pan. One additional thing that I wanted to bring up is the fact that there seems to be some confusion between the M3 CS and the M4 CS. Both cars are special, of course, but they do differ in some of the things that they come with from the factory. For instance, the M4 CS has the OLED brake lights that we first saw on the M4 GTS. They're gorgeous, and I wish I had them, but I don't. It also comes with these carbon interior door inserts instead of leather, and it's not a limited production car. The M3 CS, on the other hand, is a limited production car to 1,200 units. It does not come with the carbon door inserts, and it does not come with the OLED brake lights. It does, however, include full leather interior and has a red start-stop button. Lastly, out-of-pocket expenses. In the 2 years that I've owned the M3 CS, I have paid $0 out of pocket. Basically, all I've paid for is insurance and gas. I've had scheduled maintenance done. That was covered by BMW maintenance. I've put 12,000 miles on the car, and the CS has never broken down, faltered, or otherwise needed any additional work outside of the recommended scheduled maintenance that the car needs. I know 12,000 isn't a lot for 2 years, but I mean, working from home, I didn't get a chance to put too many miles on it. Before we wrap up, here's a look at the full build sheet. With every option ticked, including the carbon ceramic brakes and performance titanium exhaust with carbon tips, executive pack, and San Marino blue paint, it all comes out to just shy of $117,000 US, brand new. One special note is that the M3 CS was only produced for the 2018 model year. I won't argue the price difference between the M3 CS and a base M3. That has been well debated since 2018 when the car first came out. My answer obviously is yes, it is worth it. That's why I got one. With a limited production run of only 1,200 units in the world, plus all the unique updates that we've just gone over when compared to its base and competition brethren, although it didn't fly off of dealership shelves at its launch, its pedigree, its limited numbers, and its performance, in my mind, point to one thing. The F80 M3 CS will become a future classic. And I'm not just saying that because of the way the public reacted to the introduction of the G80 M3. The M3 CS is a keeper. And if you're on the market for a used one, I highly recommend you look into it. You might just find yourself messaging me here in the discussion and telling me that I did a thing today and you added it to your stable. At the very least, it's definitely worth a test drive. And that, my friends, concludes the long-term BMW F80 M3 CS owner review. Chime in, start a conversation, leave a comment. We're all car people. That's why you're here. And I personally love reading your questions and your comments. Would you purchase a used one? Do you have one? And do your experiences with your M3 CS differ from those that I've had with mine? In final, this film has been in production for well over a year, so it means a lot to me, and I greatly would appreciate your support. And if you haven't done so already, please leave this video a like, drop a comment, and of course subscribe if you haven't done so. Hit that notification bell so you get notified every time I upload a new video. Thank you for watching. I'll catch you later. You have Sapphire Black, Alpine White, Lime Rock Gray, and Dark Blue 2. There's a 2 in there. Is that a plane? Wait, hold on. No, yeah, you could totally hear it. No, it's like they know that I'm trying to record. Wind chimes. Wind chimes. Why is this happening to my life? And the dogs. Did you hear them? Thanks. You know, most people think that the CS stands for club sport.
It doesn't?
Well, it stands for competition sport. At least that's what the M engineer said when I asked him. We got competition sport, competition, and then base. Maybe I should include this in the review.